What cases do you know which involve known or suspected spies or espionage? The first two that come to mind are the Somerton Man and the Isdal Woman. Are there any other cases involving suspected spies you have heard about? I've listed all the ones I know with brief descriptions of why these are suspected spy cases and links to further info below. I could go down a rabbit hole on any one of these, but I'll try keep it brief for now. The Somerton Man, Tame and Shoot. In 1948 the body of an unidentified man was found on an Australian beach, a suspected suicide. He had taken great lengths to conceal his identity, removing the tags from his clothing. In his pocket there was the last page of the book the Rubaiyat in his pocket with the text Tame and Shoot, meaning ended, in Persian. Later the rest of the book was found and contained coded messages. The book appears to have been an extremely rare edition, which would have made it great as a book cipher. There was a joint rocket research project between the Australian and British governments underway at a nearby military base. Some speculate the Somerton Man may have been involved with gathering intelligence on this project. There is also a local nurse, suspected of being a Soviet spy, who is thought to have known the man, though she denied it. The Isdal Woman. This case is less well known than Somerton, but I think it is equally fascinating. Similarly, in 1970, a woman's unidentified body was found in the forests of Norway. In her belongings law enforcement found a number of false passports with different names. All of the tags in her garments were removed and the labels on medicines as well. Her diary contained coded messages which were later determined to be dates and locations of places she had visited. She was known to have changed hotels frequently even in the same cities and spoke multiple European languages without accent. She had told people she was an antiques dealer, which would have been a great cover for an agent gathering and passing on intelligence from high-profile assets in different countries. Her autopsy determined she had South American dental work. Law enforcement were able to track down an Italian man who had eaten dinner with her after randomly meeting in a hotel. He said she claimed to have been South African and something of a bon vivant. Who was she, who put Bella in the wych elm? In 1943 in the UK several young boys playing in the woods found the remains of a woman stuffed in the hollow of a tree. Shortly thereafter graffiti began to appear around town which read "Who put Bella in the wych elm?" The messages still show up from time to time. Not much was ever determined about her identity from the forensics of the body, but there are several theories involving espionage. One is that she was a Nazi spy parachuted into the UK. I think this one has been debunked fairly thoroughly by now. Somewhat more credibly, a woman sent a letter to a newspaper saying that the body was that of a Dutch woman killed by a Dutch spy working for the Nazis gathering intelligence at a British munitions plant. The letter writer was tracked down and her story seems credible in that she names real people, not the victim, and verifiable details about them. She claimed that her ex-husband had worked in the munitions plant during the war and was an asset for a Dutch agent, passing intelligence to this man to be forwarded to the Nazis. This makes sense to me in terms of spycraft. The ex was willingly offering credible details of the British munitions production, which the Nazis would have wanted to know to determine British military capabilities. The Dutch man would have been necessary to pass this info on to the German side. The woman says that the men picked up a Dutch woman and after a night of drinking she passed out in the car the ex was driving. The two men decided to play a prank on her, leaving her in the woods and to come back and pick her up in the morning. When they came back the woman was nowhere to be found. I find this part of the story less credible than the espionage element. There is no way to verify it since the key players are all deceased. Gareth Williams, the spy in the bag mystery. This is a pretty fascinating more recent case. Gareth Williams was a known intelligence analyst working for MI6. In 2010 he was found dead in his apartment, naked and padlocked in a large cargo bag. There has been much controversy related to determining the cause of death. Disagreement between a coroner's inquest verdict and the Metropolitan Police investigation about whether Williams' body was placed in the bag and moved by someone else or died as an accident after locking himself in the bag have led to a great deal of speculation about the case. This case is a tremendous rabbit hole with twists and turns still unfurling. It was reported that Williams had angered his bosses by hacking Bill Clinton's emails to gain access to an event guest list. In 2015 a Russian intelligence defector living in the UK said he knew what had happened to Williams. He said that a Russian mole inside MI6 had attempted to use sexually explicit photos to blackmail Williams into working as a double agent. Mr. Williams refused and threatened to expose the mole if the blackmail attempts continued. The Russian defector claims that Russian hitmen injected Williams with poison in his ear and placed him in the bag. On its face this story seems far-fetched, but after the recent Litvinenko findings I guess anything can happen. If this story is true I'm not surprised that the blackmail plot didn't work. In this day and age, who really cares what adults do in their bedrooms? With the Litvinenko case it seems an obvious message was being sent about what happens to defectors who speak out against Putin. With Williams' case, however, it seems there would have been an easier way to stage a fake suicide or accident. Was his death staged to send a message to others who he might have told the identity of the mole to keep their mouths shut? John P. Wheeler 3. This is really a lesser-known case and a lot of the details are pretty unclear. In 2010, the body of John P. Wheeler 3 was found in a landfill. The cause of death was determined to be homicide by blunt force trauma. Wheeler was retired, but had been working as a consultant for the MITRE Corporation, a non-profit which does research for government agencies, including the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security, but also the IRS and NASA. It sounds like mostly they do IT infrastructure design, but I couldn't find many specifics. In the days before his body was found, Wheeler had been seen in several locations acting disoriented. Wearing only one shoe, he approached a parking lot attendant looking for his car. He said that his briefcase had been stolen and clarified that he was not intoxicated. He was also seen by a pharmacy employee asking for a ride. When they offered to call him a cab, he left. The day before his body was discovered, he was seen around the offices of the MITRE Corporation, where he declined assistance from several people. I honestly don't know that there is any connection to espionage in this case, so I'm a little hesitant to include it. Wheeler spent most of his career working in non-profits, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, Mothers Against Drunk Driving and the Deafness Research Foundation. He was also a consultant to Acting Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and Special Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force. He was definitely politically connected to sensitive government agencies and leaders, but there is no evidence connecting that work to his death that I've found. Please comment if you have read something elsewhere.
In 1938, Hazel and Nancy Froome, the wife and daughter of a San Francisco, California munitions executive, were tortured and murdered near El Paso, Texas. Their murders were never solved. Recently, a former newspaper reporter used declassified FBI documents to link Nazi espionage to these killings and wrote a book about his theory called Fetch the Devil: The Sierra Diablo Murders and Nazi Espionage in America. I don't know whether the theory holds water or not, but this book is on my to-be-read list because I'm always fascinated by reports of spy rings operating on U.S. soil, and there is no doubt whatsoever that Nazi spies had infiltrated American businesses with government contracts to steal military secrets and sabotage operations. See the Duquesne spy ring for one such example. I also once considered doing a post here about the Lebensborn program, which was a Nazi breeding program to reintroduce Aryan blood to the German gene pool. Children produced from sexual relations between Nazi officers and local women in blonde/blue-eyed countries like Norway were shipped back to Germany for adoption by German families. Additionally, some Aryan children already orphaned were essentially abducted, Germanized, and fostered by the families of SS officers. Many of these war children had no idea they were adopted until they went to obtain marriage licenses in East Germany. The East German spy organization, the Stasi, reportedly used identities from the Lebensborn program to infiltrate European countries during the Cold War. Supposedly, there are still people out there who returned home after the war, but were actually East German spies using Lebensborn identities as espionage cover. I ended up not doing the post because I couldn't find much information about it that was written in English as opposed to Norwegian or German, but it was a fairly tantalizing story in my humble opinion. In one particular case, a woman was informed by the German intelligence service that her identity had been used as an espionage cover in the 1970s to retrieve Norwegian documents and then pretty much disappeared. The spy in question was still wanted by German authorities as of 2000.
Where is the Witch Elm spy parachute theory debunked? Not disrespecting you at all. Just that last time I read about it, a few years ago, it was a really airtight theory with some good evidence. If not, I have some fascinating reading ahead of me. Thanks.
No problem. I heard about the debunking of the parachute theory on the Case File, True Crime podcast recently. The evidence he gives is that they never found a parachute or harness attached to the remains, and the woman that the suspected of being the parachuted spy, Clara Bauerl, was taller than the body found in Hagley Woods, and Bauerl is thought to have died in Berlin in 1942. Realizing that this podcast doesn't list its sources, I just did a quick check and found some people are still researching the Bauerl angle. If there is more evidence in favor of this theory that has been overlooked, please share.
One theory about Jim Thompson's disappearance is that the former OSS agent was involved in some sort of covert work. It's just as likely he suffered an accident or medical issue, and his body was overlooked by searchers, though.
There is also a theory that he was the victim of a hit and run. The driver may have panicked and hastily hid the body. I think they found some remains nearby years later.
It is practically an open secret that the assassination of Carrero Blanco was orchestrated by the CIA and supported, either in advance or after the fact, by many people, both within the Spanish government itself and in opposition groups other than ETA, which in 1973 was a small group that had made just a few hits, and most people had never heard about.
Maybe it was just in a different time. But what would be the benefit of cutting the tags out of your clothes?
You are definitely right, different time. Nowadays if you have a Ralph Lauren shirt that could be from just about any country, but at the time of the cases mentioned there weren't so many global brands. The labels would have told investigators what country the person was from or at least traveled to. In the case of a spy it might have indicated which government you were working for. I think cutting off the tags was considered good tradecraft for espionage work. In the case of the Isdal Woman, they thought they had determined her clothes were mostly Italian high fashion based on the tailoring, etc. In the case of the Somerton Man, some of his clothing was thought to be from the US. Apparently the stripes on his ties landed in a direction that was only common in the US at that time. It's a pretty interesting detail actually.
Just a clarification, Gareth Williams was not a spy. Every time this comes up people make him more and more like James Bond. He was a desk jockey technician. He and many others did the same job. People like to use terms like spy and on assignment to make him sound more important than he was. He liked bondage, had needed to be rescued by his landlord in the past when he locked himself up and got stuck.